In 1936, the King of England gave up the throne for love. But behind the romance was a secret more dangerous than any fairy tale: the British royals who secretly worked with Hitler. You see, for nearly 90 years, the world has believed a carefully manufactured lie. Hollywood made movies about it. Historians wrote books about it. School children learned about the king who sacrificed everything for the woman he loved. But classified intelligence files tell a different story. One of Nazi salutes at Berchtesgaden, encrypted telegrams between Windsor and Berlin, and a British monarch who believed German bombs would make his people surrender. When American troops discovered 400 tons of Nazi documents in 1945, Winston Churchill launched the most desperate cover-up operation in British history. What they found wasn't evidence of a love story, but proof that Edward VIII had conspired with Hitler to reclaim his throne after Germany conquered Britain. In today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we share the untold story of Edward VIII, Wallis Simpson, and the scandal that nearly destroyed the monarchy. The greatest lie in modern British history was sold to the world on December 11, 1936, when Edward VIII spoke into a BBC microphone about the woman he loved. Behind his famous words about being unable to carry on without Wallis, Simpson lay a far darker truth that would take decades to uncover. Edward didn't abdicate for love. He was removed from the throne because his Nazi sympathies threatened to deliver Britain into Hitler's hands. Intelligence files that remained classified for decades reveal Edward wasn't merely sympathetic to fascism, but actively collaborated with Nazi Germany's highest officials. German telegrams captured after the war showed Edward believed, had he remained on the throne, war would have been avoided, and described himself as a firm supporter of a peaceful compromise with Germany. More damning still, he told Nazi agents that continued heavy bombing will make England ready for peace, essentially encouraging German attacks on his own people. The conspiracy to hide Edward's treason began immediately after his abdication and continues to this day in the sealed vaults of the Royal Archives. What the public saw was carefully orchestrated theatre, a king sacrificing his crown for romance, when in reality British intelligence had identified him as a fundamental threat to national survival. The transformation of Edward from Nazi collaborator to romantic hero required the combined efforts of Winston Churchill, media moguls, and Hollywood producers. They understood that exposing the truth would destroy not just Edward, but the entire monarchy at Britain's darkest hour. Operation Willi, the Nazi plot to kidnap Edward and reinstall him as a puppet king after conquering Britain, wasn't a German fantasy, but a plan Edward himself knew about and possibly encouraged. FBI files would later classify both Edward and Wallis as dangerous Nazi collaborators, but by then, the romantic myth had taken root too deeply to dislodge. The woman he supposedly couldn't live without was simultaneously having an affair with German ambassador Joachim von Ribbentrop and passing state secrets to the Nazis. Their love story was the perfect cover for what historian Andrew Loney would call another classic example of our history being censored. Edward's Nazi connections ran through a network of aristocratic collaborators, including Charles Edward, Duke of Coburg, who provided financial support to the Nazi Party from 1929 onward. Coburg, grandson of Queen Victoria, had regular access to Buckingham Palace while serving as Hitler's key liaison with the British royal family. The Duke formally joined the Nazi Party in March 1933 and became an Obergruppenführer in the Sturmabteilung, publicly declaring he would blindly follow Hitler forever. Edward's admiration for Hitler wasn't hidden. He visited the Führer at Berchtesgaden in October 1937, giving Nazi salutes and praising German efficiency. The photographs from that visit would haunt British intelligence for decades, showing the former king beaming beside Hitler like old friends. What appeared to be a constitutional crisis about an unsuitable marriage was actually the quiet removal of a monarch whose allegiances lay with Britain's greatest enemy. The evidence that would expose Edward's treason lay buried in the Harz Mountains until American troops stumbled upon it in May 1945. First Lieutenant David Silberberg discovered documents signed by Nazi Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop among 400 tons of captured German Foreign Ministry archives. These papers led to Marburg Castle, where more devastating materials waited in dusty chambers that had escaped Allied bombing. Karl von Loesch, assistant to Hitler's personal translator, had been ordered to destroy the most sensitive documents, but instead buried them near the castle. Facing interrogation, von Loesch traded the location of these buried treasures for immunity from prosecution, leading Allied forces to a cache of explosive correspondence. Among the discovered materials were at least 60 documents detailing communication between the Duke of Windsor and Nazi high command. The files revealed Operation Willi in meticulous German detail, not just a kidnapping plot, but an elaborate scheme involving Edward's willing participation. Nazi agents had maintained contact with Edward throughout his exile in Portugal and the Bahamas, documenting his eagerness to return to power under German sponsorship. British historian Rohan Butler reported to the Foreign Office on July 17th that the Duke appeared in a somewhat curious light in the captured documents. King George VI remained quite relaxed when briefed, but Prime Minister Clement Attlee immediately grasped the catastrophic implications. Attlee wrote to Churchill that while little credence could be placed in the statements made by German agents, their publication might do the greatest possible harm. Churchill's response revealed pure panic. He earnestly trusted that all traces of these German intrigues would be destroyed entirely. The former Prime Minister understood that Edward's unique popularity as Prince of Wales gave these revelations the power to shatter public faith in the monarchy. By August 6, 1945, Britain formally requested that the United States severely limit access to the microfilm copies American forces had made. 2 weeks later, British officials made an even more extraordinary demand. They wanted the files destroyed completely or handed over for safekeeping. The desperation intensified when Churchill returned to power in 1951 and learned historians planned to publish the Nazi telegrams. He wrote frantically to President Eisenhower in 1953, arguing the documents might leave the impression that the Duke was in close touch with German agents and was listening to suggestions that were disloyal. Churchill pressed for classification extending at least 20 years, even enlisting French government support in his suppression campaign. Eisenhower initially supported Churchill's efforts, having reviewed the files in 1945 and believing them obviously concocted for propaganda purposes. The president didn't know a microfilm copy had already reached the State Department, making complete suppression impossible. Too many historians and officials had seen the messages for total destruction to succeed, though Churchill managed to delay publication and ensure heavy redaction. When documents finally emerged in 1957, Her Majesty's Stationery Office released a defensive statement claiming Edward never wavered in his loyalty. The Duke himself denounced the published telegrams as complete fabrications, despite authentication by multiple intelligence agencies. The British government had won the first battle in suppressing evidence, but Soviet spy Anthony Blunt was about to uncover materials that would require even more desperate measures. Hollywood's transformation of Edward's treason into romance began before the Marburg files were even discovered, as if powerful forces already knew what needed to be hidden. The machinery of myth-making involved media titans William Randolph Hearst and Lord Beaverbrook, who deployed their vast empires to reshape public memory. Hearst, quite literally, dreamed of giving Britain an American queen and worked with Wallis Simpson to craft her image as an all-American success story. His newspapers, magazines, and radio stations portrayed the abdication as the century's greatest love story, while intelligence services documented Wallis passing secrets to Ribbentrop. Lord Beaverbrook's motivations were even more complex. He hoped to use the crisis to destroy Prime Minister Baldwin while simultaneously protecting Edward's reputation. American students launched Simpson for Queen campaigns, while British subjects remained largely ignorant of their king's Nazi connections. The information blackout in Britain was so complete that citizens learned about the crisis through smuggled foreign newspapers, intercepted at ports, or censored with scissors. This carefully managed narrative served multiple purposes beyond protecting Edward. It preserved the monarchy itself from association with fascism. By 1978, television had taken up the torch with Edward and Mrs. Simpson, 7 episodes that explored everything except Edward's politics. The series gave almost equal time to various perspectives, but deliberately avoided any mention of Nazi sympathies or German meetings. 10 years later, The Woman He Loved, starring Jane Seymour, perfected the romantic whitewash. focusing entirely on love while ignoring collaboration. Critics noted, "There is a political angle here, though, that is barely hinted at, when Edward tells Baldwin no British soldiers would die in Europe under his reign." This brief acknowledgement of Edward's isolationism was the closest any production came to addressing his actual beliefs about German expansion. The 1988 film presented Edward as shy, slight, elite, precise, sympathetic, while transforming documented treason into absolute romance in royal history. Each successive production built upon previous lies until even documentaries began presenting fiction as fact. Madonna's 2011 film W.E. represented the myth's apotheosis, interweaving Windsor romance with modern fantasy despite being critically panned. The 2010 Oscar winner, The King's Speech, cemented the false narrative by depicting Edward's abdication as solely upon his desire to marry. Guy Pearce portrayed Edward as irresponsible and selfish but never treacherous, reducing treason to mere character flaws. By 2022, documentaries were calling Edward arguably one of the best representations of absolute romance in royal history. The propaganda had succeeded so completely that historians found themselves fighting against decades of accumulated lies. Modern productions almost always include excerpts from Edward's famous radio broadcast about the woman he loved, despite the BBC originally planning to destroy the recording. Engineers had disobeyed orders to preserve what became the cornerstone of a false narrative that would endure for generations. The systematic nature of this propaganda campaign reveals coordination between government, media, and entertainment industries. Someone understood that transforming treason into romance required consistent messaging across decades and multiple platforms. The Royal Archives continue their conspiracy of silence nearly 8 decades later, operating what historian Dr. Karina Urbach calls a deliberate clean-up operation. Correspondence between the royal family and their German relatives from the 1930s and 40s remains locked away, fueling endless conspiracy theories. When Dr. Urbach requested letters between the Duke of Coburg and Queen Mary that most certainly exist, she received one postcard and assurances that nothing else survived. "This is bizarre and ridiculous," Urbach observed, noting that Coburg visited Queen Mary all the time, and extensive correspondence must have existed. The systematic destruction of evidence points to secrets far more damaging than Edward's individual treason. Anthony Blunt, the Soviet spy who served as surveyor of the King's pictures, was dispatched on a mysterious mission to Germany in 1945. Officially tasked with retrieving letters between Kaiser Wilhelm and the Tsar, Blunt's real purpose was gathering evidence of royal Nazi connections. He secured the letters which British and German aristocrats had written to Hitler's art agent and henchman before they could damage the monarchy. These voluminous letters may have shed light on the royal family's ties to Nazi Germany, but instead vanished into intelligence archives. Russian authorities today may possess copies of the most damaging materials, repeatedly threatening to publish Blunt's file detailing what kind of letters he collected. The cleanup operation Churchill euphemistically termed weeding involved a top-secret team sent to Berlin to find and conceal anything that documented the Duke's interactions. Recent research reveals Edward was merely the visible tip of a much larger network of Nazi sympathizers within British aristocracy. Charles Edward, Duke of Coburg, served as Hitler's primary liaison with the British royal family while maintaining regular Buckingham Palace access. This grandson of Queen Victoria had provided financial support to the Nazi Party since 1929 and renovated Kallenberg Castle with a swastika tower. By 1934, Coburg publicly declared he would blindly follow Hitler forever, while continuing his mysterious correspondence with Queen Mary. His importance to Nazi Germany was so critical that Hitler, facing defeat in his Berlin bunker, sent a telegram insisting Coburg must not fall into enemy hands. Coburg's involvement extended to financing political murders and having knowledge of death camps through his cousin Prince Josias Waldeck-Pyrmont. Waldeck-Pyrmont served as a high-ranking member of the SS who supervised one of the death camps in Buchenwald. The network of royal Nazi collaboration reached depths that threatened the entire British establishment's legitimacy. FBI files classified both Edward and Wallis as dangerous Nazi collaborators, but this designation apparently applied to numerous aristocrats. The Duke of Westminster, one of Britain's richest men, openly supported Hitler and hosted Ribbentrop at his estates. Lord Rothermere used his newspaper empire to praise Hitler, while Lord Londonderry entertained Nazi leaders at his country house. This aristocratic fifth column operated with apparent immunity, protected by class solidarity and shared authoritarian sympathies. The evidence hidden in royal vaults likely documents not individual treachery, but systemic collaboration threatening Britain's entire power structure. The abdication broadcast that millions remember as history's greatest romantic sacrifice was actually the culmination of history's most successful cover-up operation. Edward spoke of the woman he loved, while British intelligence held files documenting his encouragement of German bombing raids against London. The romantic myth proved so powerful that it survived decades of gradually emerging evidence, demonstrating how effectively coordinated lies can reshape historical memory. Even today, with partial access to damning documents, most people believe Edward sacrificed his throne for love, rather than being removed for treason. The conspiracy's success required not just suppressing evidence, but actively manufacturing false narratives across multiple generations. Churchill's 1953 desperation to keep files classified for 20 years has extended into perpetual secrecy through royal prerogative. Documents that should have entered public domain decades ago remain locked in Windsor Castle vaults, protected by laws designed for national security. The Royal Archives policy creates a historical black hole where evidence disappears and myths flourish unchallenged. Meanwhile, Hollywood continues producing romantic versions of the abdication story, each iteration further cementing the lie in public consciousness. Television documentaries quote Edward's abdication speech as historical fact, while ignoring authenticated Nazi telegrams in intelligence archives. The machinery that transformed treason into romance operates so smoothly that questioning the narrative seems almost subversive. School textbooks repeat the love story, while academic historians fight losing battles against 8 decades of accumulated propaganda. The stakes extend far beyond historical accuracy to fundamental questions about power, accountability, and democratic transparency. If a king's collaboration with Nazi Germany can be successfully rewritten as romantic sacrifice, what other lies shape our understanding of history? The network of aristocratic Nazi sympathizers that Edward represented didn't disappear after 1945, but evolved and adapted. Their descendants hold positions of power throughout British society, benefiting from wealth accumulated through collaboration. The same families who hosted Ribbentrop and praised Hitler transformed themselves into pillars of post-war democracy. No Truth and Reconciliation Commission ever examined British aristocratic collaboration with fascism. No reckoning occurred for those who would have welcomed German conquest if it preserved their privileges. Instead, the establishment closed ranks, destroyed evidence, and manufactured myths to protect itself from accountability. The success of Edward's rehabilitation from traitor to romantic hero established a template for historical revision. Powerful institutions learned they could reshape public memory through coordinated media campaigns and selective document release. The techniques perfected during the abdication cover-up, classification abuse, manufactured narratives, media manipulation, remain standard practice. Russian intelligence services still hold documents about royal Nazi connections, potential diplomatic bombs that enforce British compliance through blackmail. The price of maintaining the lie includes vulnerability to foreign powers who possess suppressed evidence. Britain's much-vaunted special relationship with America partly stems from American possession of the complete Marburg files. The lie that began in 1936 continues to corrupt British democracy, requiring endless energy to maintain against emerging truth. Edward died peacefully in 1972, taking his secrets to a grave marked with honors he didn't deserve, the ultimate beneficiary of history's most successful whitewash. And now, we'd like to see you in the comments. Before this video, were you aware of Edward's secret history? We look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for joining another episode of Old Money Luxury.